The first time Raymond Ray Kowalski realized his new neighbor was going to be a serious problem, he was standing in his backyard at 6 in the morning, coffee in hand, watching a Maricopa County sheriff's cruiser pull slowly into his driveway. The officer stepped out, young guy, hat already on, even in the Arizona heat that was just beginning to build. He said, "Sir, we received a complaint that you were operating he glanced at his notepad, a hazardous workshop facility without a permit, disturbing the peace and potentially running an unlicensed business out of a residential zone." Ray said nothing for a moment. He set his coffee mug down on the porch railing, slowly, deliberately. Then he looked the young officer in the eye and said, "Son, I've been sitting in this chair since 5:15 this morning. I haven't turned on a single tool. Would you like to come inside and have some coffee while we sort this out?" That was call number 1. There would be 9 more. And on the 10th call, the one the neighbor made thinking he finally had Ray cornered, everything came apart, not for Ray. For the neighbor. Let me tell you about Copper Mesa Drive. It sits in the quiet suburb of Anthem Heights, just northwest of Phoenix, Arizona. Not the flashy part of the valley, not Scottsdale with its rooftop pools and valet parking. Anthem Heights was the kind of neighborhood where people had vegetable gardens and basketball hoops and one American flag per 3 houses on a good day. The street curved in a gentle arc past 14 single-family homes. Desert willow trees lined the sidewalk on both sides, their pink blossoms dropping every April in a way that made the whole block look like a watercolor painting. The summers were brutal, you knew that going in, you accepted it. You kept your sprinklers on a timer, you checked on your elderly neighbors, and you watched the monsoon clouds build on the southern horizon every August like something biblical was coming. In the evenings, people sat on their front porches. Kids rode bikes. Someone's golden retriever, old Mr. Hashimoto's dog, a 12-year-old lab named Biscuit, would trot from yard to yard collecting ear scratches like she was conducting official diplomatic business. It was, in the truest sense of the word, a neighborhood. The summer of 2019 was the last time Copper Mesa Drive would feel completely peaceful. Because in late July of that year, the house at 14 Copper Mesa Drive, a cream-colored ranch home with a terracotta roof, a 2-car garage, and a half-acre lot that backed up to a dry wash, went up for sale. And someone bought it. Let me tell you about Raymond Kowalski. Master Sergeant Raymond Daniel Kowalski, United States Army, retired, 26 years of service. Enlisted in 1983, the year he turned 19, fresh out of Glendale, Arizona, with a high school diploma and a letter of recommendation from his ROTC instructor that said, simply, "Raymond Kowalski does not quit." He didn't. He served in Panama during Operation Just Cause. He was in Saudi Arabia before Desert Storm even had a name, setting up forward communications networks in the desert at night, breathing sand. He did 2 tours in Iraq. He finished his career at Fort Huachuca, down near the Mexican border, training the next generation of Army intelligence operators in signals analysis. He retired in 2009. His wife, Patricia, everyone called her Patty, had grown up in the neighborhood they'd settled in years before. They'd bought the house at 12 Copper Mesa Drive in 2001, when housing prices made it possible on a sergeant's salary. She'd planted a rose garden along the southern fence line, 15 rose bushes, hybrid teas and climbers in red and white, and a deep burgundy that she said reminded her of the velvet on her grandmother's settee. Patty died of ovarian cancer in the spring of 2015. Ray stayed in the house. He converted the 3rd bedroom into a woodworking shop. He built furniture, clean, precise stuff, dovetail joints, hand-planed surfaces. He sold some pieces at a local artisan market on Saturdays, which gave him enough to supplement his pension and get out of the house on weekends. The kids on the block called him Mr. Ray. He kept a journal, had since Vietnam-era ROTC. Every morning he wrote the date, the weather, and at least one sentence about what he planned to do that day. It was a habit that, years later, would become one of the most important things he owned. There was one other thing about Ray Kowalski that nobody on Copper Mesa Drive knew. We'll get to that. The only real wound he carried was the quiet. The house was too big for one person. On winter nights, when the desert cooled fast and the stars came out sharp over the Bradshaw Mountains, he'd sometimes sit in the kitchen at Patty's old chair, not his, hers, and drink his coffee and not say anything to anyone for hours at a stretch. He was 62 years old, and he was entirely alone. That's important context for what came next. The moving trucks showed up on a Thursday. Two of them, rented from a premium service, white, freshly washed, with uniformed movers who worked fast. Behind them, sitting in the shade of the new neighbor's garage while the movers unloaded, was a pearl-white 2021 Porsche Cayenne with California plates. His name was Devin Ashcroft, 34 years old, co-founder and CEO of a venture-backed tech startup called Loomis Analytics, an AI-powered data brokerage platform that scraped public records and resold compiled consumer profiles to marketing firms. His LinkedIn headline read, "Disrupting the Data Intelligence Space." He had 47,000 Instagram followers and a podcast called Velocity Mindset, where he interviewed other founders about their morning routines. He'd relocated to Arizona, as he explained to anyone who asked, to escape California's regulatory environment. He'd bought the house at 14 Copper Mesa Drive for $640,000 cash. He planned to use it as a remote work compound for himself and a rotating cast of employees, collaborators, and podcast guests. He was not married, he did not have children, he had a Peloton and a stand-up desk and opinions. The first red flag came on his second day. Ray walked over to introduce himself. He brought a small paper bag of homemade granola, something he made on Sunday mornings, something Patty used to love. He knocked on the door. Devin answered in a Lululemon quarter zip and AirPods. He looked at Ray, looked at the granola, looked back at Ray. "You a neighbor?" he said. "Next door," Ray said and held out his hand. "Ray Kowalski, welcome to the street." Devin shook it for 1 second. He took the granola bag, glanced at it without opening it, set it on the entry table behind him. "Thanks, man. Hey, quick question. That workshop of yours, how early does it start? I do my best creative work before 9 and I can't have disruptions during that window." Ray's workshop didn't open until 8. On most days, closer to 9. He'd never had a single noise complaint in 8 years. "I'll keep it reasonable," Ray said. Devin nodded. "Cools, yeah, that'd be great." He was already looking back at his phone. "I'm on a call." He closed the door. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in late August, still dark when Ray turned on his shop lights, the sky outside the garage windows going from black to violet to pale orange, the doorbell rang. 7:45 a.m., a sheriff's deputy on the porch. The complaint filed with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office stated that the resident at 12 Copper Mesa Drive was operating a commercial woodworking business out of a residential property, generating excessive noise before permitted hours, and creating a safety hazard through the emission of sawdust particulates. Ray had been using a hand plane. A hand plane, it's a block of metal with a blade in it that you push across wood. It makes a whisper. The deputy was apologetic. He walked through the shop, noted there was no commercial activity, noted the equipment was standard hobbyist woodworking tools, and left Ray with a form number and an apology. Ray did 2 things immediately after the deputy left. First, he pulled out the Moleskine journal he kept on the workbench. He wrote the date, August 27, 2019, the deputy's name, badge number, the time of arrival, and a description of every word spoken. He'd kept notebooks for 40 years. He knew how to document. Second, he went to the Home Depot on Bell Road and purchased 3 security cameras. He mounted one over his garage door, one over his front porch, one on the south fence line, angled toward his rose garden, Patty's rose garden, and the property line he shared with 14 Copper Mesa Drive. He tested the motion activation, checked the night vision, verified the timestamp function. He put the receipt in a file folder. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried to handle a conflict with a neighbor the right way, calmly, politely, by the book, only to have it used against you? Drop a comment below and tell me your story, because I promise you this audience has been through it too. Ray knocked on Devin's door that afternoon. "I understand you filed a complaint," he said when Devin answered. Devin shrugged. I have a right to a quiet work environment. It's in the HOA guidelines. I was using a hand plane, Ray said. Devin looked at him flatly. Listen, I don't know how things worked wherever you're from or whatever, but this is a residential street. People moved here because it's quiet. I'm just protecting that. He paused and added, honestly, you might want to consider whether a hobby shop is really appropriate in this neighborhood. Some of us are trying to build actual things here. He meant his company. He closed the door. Ray went home, made coffee, wrote it all down. Call number 2 came in September. Devin had begun hosting what he called founder sprints, 4 to 6 young professionals who'd show up on Friday afternoon in rideshares, work through the weekend, and leave Monday morning. They parked on the street. They parked specifically with 2 wheels across Ray's driveway apron. Ray left a polite note on the windshield the first time. The second time he took photos and had the car towed. Devin was furious. He showed up at Ray's door at 9 at night. That was a $1,000 impound fee. Do you know who that car belongs to? That's an investor. That's a city fire lane violation, Ray said from behind the screen door. Have your guests park on Devin's side of the street. Devin stared at him, then he left. Call number 3 came in October. Anonymous complaint to the HOA alleging that Ray's fence was 2 inches over the property line. The HOA sent a notice. Ray pulled out his original property survey, the one filed with Maricopa County in 2001, and sent a copy to the HOA board. Survey was clean, case closed. Call number 4 was to animal control, alleging that Ray kept an unregistered and potentially dangerous dog. Ray hadn't owned a dog since 2016 when his lab, Corporal, named by his son years ago, passed away at 14. He sent Animal Control a copy of Corporal's death certificate. Animal Control closed the file. In November, someone kicked over Ray's mailbox. Not just pushed it, it was a steel post cemented in the ground. It was kicked hard enough to crack the concrete cap and leave a fresh scuff mark on the metal. Ray photographed it, documented it, filed a report with the post office. He did not say anything to Devin. He ordered a new camera, a 4K model with a wider field of view, and mounted it to replace the lower resolution unit on the south fence. This one recorded continuously to a cloud server, not just on motion trigger. In December, his rose bushes along the south fence line, Patty's roses, began to die. Not all at once, slowly. First the leaves yellowed, then the canes started to go brown from the tips. By Christmas, 5 of the 15 bushes were visibly dying in a cluster nearest to Devin's property line. Ray took soil samples from the affected area. He took them to the Maricopa County Cooperative Extension Office and asked the master gardener on duty to test them. The results came back in January. Elevated sodium chloride levels. Someone had poured rock salt along the fence line, in enough quantity to leach into the root zone of everything planted within 2 feet. Ray took the extension report and put it in the file folder with everything else. Call number 5 was in January. Now let me pause here a second because I want you to understand something about what Ray was doing during all of this. He wasn't just collecting evidence. He wasn't building a case out of spite. He was doing what 26 years of military intelligence work had trained him to do: document, verify, date, source, and file. He never yelled, he never confronted, he never even raised his voice. The man who sat across the property line from him had no idea who he was dealing with. But we'll get to that. Calls 6, 7, and 8 came in the spring of 2020. 6 was a code compliance complaint about an unauthorized structure, Ray's tool shed, which had been permitted and inspected in 2007. 7 was another noise complaint, this time about Ray's truck, a 2008 Ford F-250 with a diesel engine, which Devin claimed was being revved repeatedly as an act of intimidation. 8 was a report to the Arizona Registrar of Contractors claiming Ray was running an unlicensed contracting business. Each one was investigated, each one went nowhere. Call number 9 happened on a May evening. Ray was sitting on his porch when he heard glass break. He turned. His mailbox, the new one installed in February, was on the ground. He could see, from where he sat, a man walking quickly back toward 14 Copper Mesa Drive's side gate. Ray didn't move. He let the motion-activated camera do its work. What happened on the morning of June 14, 2020, is the moment this story turns. Ray woke at 5:15 as he always did. He made his coffee. He wrote in his journals the weather, the date, one line about what he planned to do. He went to the south window that looked out over the backyard. Patty's rose garden was gone. Not dead, gone. Someone had come over the fence in the night. The camera would confirm the timestamp as 2:47 a.m., and with a battery-powered hedge trimmer and a pair of loppers had cut every single rose bush down to 3 inches above the soil. 15 plants, some of them 20 years old. The canes were thrown over the fence into Ray's yard in a pile. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he went outside. He walked to the garden. He crouched down and looked at each stump. He touched the soil where the salt damage had killed 5 of them already. He stood up. He went back inside. He sat at the kitchen table, Patty's chair. He poured his coffee down the drain and made a fresh pot. He opened his journal and he wrote the date, the time, and the words, "Rose garden destroyed, 15 plants, footage secured, proceeding." Then he made 2 phone calls. If you think Ray is going to let this go, you've never met a man like Ray Kowalski. The first call was to a lawyer, not a local family law attorney, not a general practice firm. He called a man named Gerald Acaffer who had a civil litigation practice in downtown Phoenix and had handled cases involving property damage, harassment campaigns, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Gerald was 60 years old, wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and had not lost a civil case in 11 years. The second call was to someone whose name Ray hadn't dialed in 2 years. A man named Colonel James "Jimmy" Beaumont, retired, now a senior investigator with the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau of Consumer Protection. Ray and Jimmy had served together at Fort Huachuca for 6 years. Jimmy had been trying to reach Ray for a while, actually. He had some questions about a company called Loomis Analytics. Here's what nobody on Copper Mesa Drive knew at the time. Here's what Devin Ashcraft, in all his certainty that Raymond Kowalski was just a harmless old man with a hobby shop, had never bothered to find out. Ray Kowalski had spent the last 8 years of his Army career, 2001 to 2009, not as a general signals analyst, but as a senior instructor in human and technical collection at the Army Intelligence Center. In plain English, he trained people who gathered intelligence through human networks and electronic surveillance. He knew with military precision how to build a documented evidentiary record that would hold up in a federal court. He also knew from 40 years of experience that patience was not weakness, it was leverage. Jimmy Beaumont, in his current role at the FTC, had been quietly building a case for 14 months. The case centered on a data broker that had been systematically misclassifying personal consumer data as publicly available, collecting information through methods that violated the FTC Act's prohibition on deceptive trade practices, and then selling that data to marketing firms without disclosing to consumers that their information had been compiled, stored, or sold. The company was Loomis Analytics. Devin's little disruptive data intelligence startup was, in the language of the investigation, a front-end scraping operation that had harvested over 40 million consumer records through methods that lawyers were, by the summer of 2020, describing as systematically unlawful. The FTC case had been building in parallel, entirely separate from anything happening on Copper Mesa Drive, for over a year. But when Ray called Jimmy in June of 2020 and mentioned who his neighbor was, Jimmy was quiet on the phone for a moment. "Ray," he said, "tell me everything you've got." Ray opened his file folder. 3 years of documented police complaints, copies of every sheriff's report, the HOA dispute record, the extension office soil test showing salt contamination, photos of the destroyed mailbox, the 4K camera footage from June 14th, time-stamped, showing a figure entering Ray's property at 2:47 a.m., moving to the rose garden with tools and cutting every plant down. Gerald Acaffer, when Ray walked into his office with the folder, looked through it for 40 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up over his reading glasses and said, "Mr. Kowalski, this is a harassment campaign, a documented, extended, deliberate harassment campaign, and I can see intentional destruction of property. I can see tortious interference. I can see criminal trespass on at least 3 of these incidents." He set the folder down. "How would you like to proceed?" Ray thought about Patty's roses. He thought about the kitchen chair. He thought about a gray May morning in 1991 when he'd sat in a tent outside Basra and written a letter home to his wife that said, very simply, "I'm coming back. I always come back." He said completely. "Now let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where you realized, finally, that someone had given you everything you needed to hold them accountable? Where patience finally paid off? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to know. Because what happened next on Copper Mesa Drive, what happened over the next 60 days, is the kind of thing people talk about on this street for years." It was a gray Tuesday morning in October 13th, 2020. The monsoon season had passed. The air was dry and cooling fast. By 6:30, the sky above Anthem Heights was the color of old pewter, clouds low and flat, and you could smell the creosote after last night's brief rain, that clean, resinous desert smell that Ray always said was the best smell in the world. He made his coffee, he wrote in his journal, he went out to the porch. At 8:15 in the morning, 3 vehicles turned onto Copper Mesa Drive. The first was a black Ford Expedition with government plates. The second was a Maricopa County Sheriff's Cruiser. The third was a process server sedan, silver, unremarkable. They parked in front of 14 Copper Mesa Drive. Devin Ashcraft came to his front door in a gray hoodie, coffee in hand, at the sound of the car doors. He looked at the vehicles, he looked at the people stepping out, he looked at the credentials being held up. One of the men in plain clothes, an FTC agent named Rodriguez, said, "Mr. Ashcraft, we have a federal investigative warrant and a civil notice from the Maricopa County Superior Court. I need you to come with us." Devin stood very still. What is this?" he said. "I need to call my attorney." "You absolutely can do that, sir. That's your right, but I need you to step outside first." The civil notice, served by the process server while the FTC warrant was being explained, was a lawsuit filed by Raymond Daniel Kowalski, represented by Gerald Acaffer in the Maricopa County Superior Court. The charges: criminal trespass 2 counts, intentional destruction of personal property, sustained harassment and nuisance, tortious interference, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The claim: damages, $414,000. That figure included the documented value of 15 rose bushes, several of which had been growing for 20 years and had documented market value as mature ornamental specimens. It included 2 destroyed mailboxes. It included the cost of soil remediation of the area damaged by salt. It included the labor and legal costs of responding to 9 false police complaints. And it included a significant sum for emotional distress, substantiated by a sworn statement from Ray's physician and a detailed chronology of events. The FTC action, filed separately in federal court, alleged that Loomis Analytics had violated the FTC Act through systematic deceptive data collection practices affecting more than 40 million consumers. The proposed civil penalty in that action was $2.3 million, with an additional consent decree requiring the company to destroy all unlawfully collected data, a database representing essentially all of Loomis Analytics' commercial value. Devin's Series B investors, who had put $8.4 million into Loomis Analytics 18 months prior, received official notice of the FTC action that same morning. Ray sat on his porch. He did not watch. He drank his coffee and he looked out at where Patty's rose garden used to be. The stumps were still there, 15 of them. He'd left them exactly as they were since June. He heard voices across the street. He heard a car door. He did not look up. And that's when everything changed. The street was very quiet. Mr. Hashimoto came out of number 9 with Biscuit on the leash. He stopped on the sidewalk. He looked at the cars. He looked at Ray's porch. He raised one hand. Ray raised his coffee mug. The Delacroix family at number 7, the mom, 2 kids, a minivan, came out for the school run and stopped completely. The kids stared. The mom put her hand on her oldest child's shoulder and just watched. Devin Ashcraft was not handcuffed. The FTC action was civil, not criminal at that stage. He was served. He was questioned. He was walked through the warrant. But he stood in his driveway in a gray hoodie, no shoes, and watched his company die in the October air on a quiet street in Anthem Heights, Arizona. His podcast went dark the same week. Velocity Mindset posted its last episode, an interview with a growth marketing consultant, in September 2020. It was never updated again. His Series B investors issued a statement saying they were conducting a full review of the company's data practices and cooperating with federal authorities. Within 3 months, they had written down the investment to zero. The moving truck came to 14 Copper Mesa Drive on February 3, 2021. It was a cold morning, by Phoenix standards anyway, 44 degrees, which in the desert feels like something that requires a coat. Nobody on Copper Mesa Drive came outside to watch him go. Not one person. The pearl-white Porsche Cayenne backed out of the driveway, turned north on the main road, and disappeared. Biscuit watched it from Mr. Hashimoto's yard, then walked over to Ray's porch and sat at his feet. Ray scratched her ears. "Good girl," he said. The civil case settled out of court in March of 2021. The terms were sealed, as civil settlements often are, but Gerald Acaffer, in a brief statement to Ray in his downtown Phoenix office, said only, "You won't need to worry about your property taxes for a while." The FTC action was resolved in early 2022. Loomis Analytics agreed to a consent decree, paid $2.1 million in civil penalties, and was required to destroy its entire consumer data database, approximately 43 million records, under FTC supervision. The company formally dissolved in April 2022. Devin Ashcraft relocated to Texas. His LinkedIn profile was last updated in late 2021. His Instagram account went private. Velocity Mindset was delisted from all podcast platforms. In the spring of 2021, Ray hired a local landscaper, a woman named Alina, who had a native plant nursery out near Cave Creek, to help him restore the rose garden. Alina told him that the root systems of older rose bushes are more resilient than people realize, that even with the canes cut and the salt damage in the soil, some of the root crowns had survived. She was right. By autumn of 2021, 4 of Patty's original 15 rose bushes had come back. Not from new plants, from the original roots. One of them, the deep burgundy climber, the one that Patty had always said reminded her of her grandmother's settee, was the first to bloom. Ray sat on his porch on the morning it opened. He had his coffee, he had his journal, he wrote the date, the weather, and one sentence. She came back. The house at 14 Copper Mesa Drive was purchased 6 months after Devin left by a couple named Marcus and Diana Rays. Marcus was a high school history teacher. Diana was a pediatric occupational therapist. They had 2 kids and a golden retriever named Penny. On their first morning on the street, Diana walked over with a plate of homemade churros. Ray answered the door. He looked at the churros, he looked at Diana. He laughed, the first full laugh anyone on Copper Mesa Drive had heard from him in years. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said. "You see, folks, there's a thing that certain people never learn. They look at a man who is quiet and they decide he is weak. They look at a man who is patient and they decide he is passive. They look at a man who is old, who has lived a full life, served his country, lost someone he loved, and built something steady and good out of what remained, and they decide he is a problem they can manage. They forget that quiet men have long memories, that patient men have full files, that old men who have sat in tents in the desert and written letters home in the dark and come back when they said they would, that those men have a very precise understanding of what is worth fighting for and how to fight when the moment finally comes." Ray Kowalski never raised his voice, not once in all of it. He didn't have to. There's an old principle, you'll find it in military doctrine, you'll find it in law, you'll find it in the long, quiet lives of people who have been through real things, that says the moment of confrontation is just the last move in a game that was decided long before. Devin Ashcraft made his first mistake the morning he filed a false complaint about a hand plane. He made his last mistake at 2:40 4:47 a.m. in June in a rose garden. He never knew the difference. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak man, never mistake patience for permission, and never not ever pick a fight with a veteran who has nothing left to lose but his honor. Because the one thing 26 years of service teaches you, above all else, is this: you finish what you start. If you've been through something like this, a neighbor, a bully, someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them, drop your story in the comments. This community is full of people who have been there. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like Ray's today, share this video, because some people need to be reminded that justice is patient. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories just like this one. Ray's doing fine, by the way. The burgundy climber bloomed again this spring. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.